I would tell my 12-year-old self that as difficult as this is, and for all the pain you're going through, that you will one day understand why you had to go through this, and that you will find your knight in shining armor, and you will be loved. You will find that love in your life that you've always been seeking.
Ever wondered how some people manage to overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges and not just survive, but thrive? Today, we sit down with Marci Hopkins, a woman whose life story is a testament to the power of resilience and the importance of giving back. Marcy is the Emmy Award-winning host of Wake Up with Marcy, a talk show with a heart, airing on CBS and streaming platforms where she shares inspiring stories of transformation. She's also a recovery expert, author of Chaos to Clarity, just finished reading that, and a passionate advocate for survivors of abuse. From her own struggles with addiction to her tireless work supporting women and children in need, Marcy's journey is one of hope, healing, and ultimately leadership. Before I get to Marcy, speaking of incredible journeys, I just want to remind our listeners we're about to embark on a milestone of our own. This is episode, as we're counting it, 298 of our show, and we are gearing up for number 300, our 300th episode and beyond, with some truly special guests. Trust us, you don't want to miss this. You don't want to miss what we have in store. So make sure you're following and subscribed wherever you listen or watch so you don't miss a single episode. It's going to be really cool. All righty. So Marcy, we're celebrating and you're getting close. Welcome to Seek, Go, Create.
That is so exciting. Congratulations. I'm number 298.
298. Yeah. Have you ever been able to say that? Woohoo, I'm number 298.
I have not, but yeah, I'll celebrate that today.
Good. Well, I think we should celebrate every day, and 298 is something to celebrate. Marcy, I'm very excited for this conversation. I read your book, looked at some of your stuff. It stretched me in some ways and caused me to think about a lot of things. And I think we're going to get into that and have some cool conversations. Before I do that, though, I call it an icebreaker question, but truthfully, it's too much for an icebreaker question. You've got a choice. First question.
Yeah.
Would you rather answer, what do you do, or who are you? Pick it and start answering.
I'm going to say, who am I? Because that leads to what I do. So who am I is someone that has overcome some difficulties in life, struggles from trauma and addiction, and overcoming the pain and being a victim. And today I am a survivor and a thriver, like you've said, and I'm almost 10 years sober. And through this journey, I have actually discovered who I am, what my joys are, what my passions are, what my purpose is. And it was by these difficult times and this huge transformational shift for me that I was able to go within and identify what it is that I was put on this earth to do. And that was to be of service to others, to help others through difficult times, know that they are worthy of a beautiful life, just as I have found, and that your past does not define you. We have multiple steps that we need to take in this life. And the first is turning ourselves over to our higher power, which is what I did. But today, because of this work, I am now doing that, helping others to live a beautiful, successful life through the platforms that I have created. And that is Wake Up with Marcy and my book and beyond.
Yeah, there's a word that just jumped in my head that I'm going to kind of ask as a follow-up. And the word is peace. And are you at peace now? I sense that you are, but answer that. And then if you're at peace now, can you go back a little bit and talk about when you arrived at that place? And I know it's part of your story here. I don't know if I do want to dive into that, but tell me what it was like before then and then when it occurred.
I will tell you, I mean, I lived in utter chaos. I mean, my book is Chaos to Clarity, and my life was chaos. I was raised in chaos. I was raised in drama. I was raised with yelling and just dysfunction. And that's all I knew. My relationships were dysfunctional. The way I managed my life was dysfunctional. And even though I would always say that I wanted that to be different, when that is all you know, when you do have peace in any way, your skin almost crawls. And then you create the drama and the chaos for yourself. It is once that I stopped when I stopped drinking, and I put down the one thing that I thought that was helping me, but was actually destroying me, I was able to start the journey towards peace. And as I started doing the work, meditating, my gratitude practice, being very connected to God in a different way, I started to find peace. I wasn't reacting to life anymore. I became a good mother. I was a good wife. I am a good wife and a good mother. I'm a good friend. I'm a good leader. And I'm all these things now because I did the work and I have found peace within life, even during the difficult times, because I now know how to approach difficult times now. I look at them as a learning opportunity, even though they're hard to get through. It doesn't destroy me like it used to. And so to be in this place of peace and tranquility, which I do believe that, and part of that is being okay to be quiet and alone. It's a beautiful place to be. And it continues to evolve and get more and more comfortable.
I think your husband's name's Ray. Is that correct?
Correct.
I got the impression, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, that Ray grew up in a different atmosphere than
Very.
you did.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to use a few words and then you could describe it.
Uh-huh.
That one would say it was more peaceful, maybe a bit of a father's knows best. Didn't sound like he came from a broken home or any abuse that was obvious or anything like that, and probably quiet and things like that. Would all that be accurate?
That would
Right.
be.
So my wife and I are similar.
Mm,
She grew up in a very challenging, chaotic would be a great word to use.
mhm.
And I grew up in a very similar to Ray. So Ray and I are alike. You and my wife are alike.
Yeah.
What are some things that you've learned,
Mm,
the contrast between those two? And the
mm,
reason why I'm asking it, let me go ahead and give you the reason.
mm.
I believe we've got two types of people listening in. The people that grew up in, like you and my wife, that want to learn how they might could continue finding peace. And then the people like us that are attempting to have some compassion and understanding and go, Marcy, I don't get it. I'm trying to get it.
Mhm.
And there's a beautiful story in the book we might get to later about how you and Ray came to some, I think it was a real peak in your story, but just talk about the contrast that
Yeah.
you've seen.
Yeah. It's hard. I mean, I'll tell you, it the first years of our relationship were very, very difficult because I reacted. I yelled. That's what I knew. So if I had an emotion that didn't feel good, I would yell. And for him, there was no yelling in the house. His parents didn't fight in front of him. He didn't understand that. So he would be like, we must not be good for each other because we're yelling and that's not normal. And I'm like, that's normal. You just work it out. Or, you know, so I will say it did cause a lot of problems in our relationship because we didn't know how to converse productively and get through situations. I used to yell at him that you should understand and you should change for these reasons. And he would just shut down. And we never really learned or progressed through our difficult times. And what I've learned today, because this is what I've had to learn and he's had to learn on his side. So I have learned how to now approach a difficult conversation in a different way. Whereas it's not like you, it's more, I have felt this way or I feel this way when you have said this or you've reacted in this way or you don't do this. And so when I can start the conversation in a way that is not putting him on the defense, then he is much more open to the conversation. And he's also realized that communication is so important. Like if we are having a difficult time, just shutting down is not helpful either. So we have both come together and learned how to better communicate with one another. As we've always heard, communication is key. But communication is one of the hardest things to do in life. We aren't really taught how to effectively communicate with other people. And so thankfully now there's a lot more conversation around that. And once you get to a place where you are comfortable approaching those difficult conversations and know how to approach those difficult situations, you can get so much further in life and build. Even though it's a difficult conversation, you actually grow through that.
What's fascinating, I'm smiling, and I'm not laughing at what you're saying, but I'm smiling about it. My wife and I, we there was this conversation we had. We've been married 36 years, I think.
Wow.
That's accurate. And I grew up in this very quiet and still, and I don't want to say unemotional environment, but maybe that would be accurate.
Yeah, at that.
And I remember, like, early in our marriage, I told my wife, Gloria, I said, "Now listen, I heard a little bit of yelling, not relative to what I thought." I said, "I would really prefer for us to not have yelling in the house. If we need to communicate, let's sit down and talk." I will tell you that it didn't entirely work out that way. Um, anyway, there's one other thing I wanna mention a couple things about my wife's situation because I kept seeing glimpses of her situation in reading through your story, and you detailed it greatly. We don't have to go through all of it, but when you were 6 years old, there was a situation. When you were 12, there was a situation.
Mhm.
And I may have mentioned this before on the podcast, but if not, when we went nomad, we digitized all of our photos. And I was digitizing all these photos of my wife, and I noticed, I mean, we didn't know each other then, but as a child, when she hit 8 years old, she had a smile on her face leading up to that. But then after 8 years old, she was very somber. There was
Yeah.
never a smile that I saw almost. I mean, we've even discussed it even through to much into her adult years. That was the year that her brother died of leukemia, her younger brother. And her family was already sort of falling apart, and that was probably something that kind of sped it along.
Yeah.
In your upbringing, and I know the situation with your mother, you detail it greatly in the book, is that she went through a lot of challenges and issues, and my wife's mother was very similar, very unstable and didn't have a lot of identity and things like that. Were there times that if I were to scanning the pictures of your childhood, there would be smiles and all, and then at 6 or 12, all of a sudden somber? Or do you have any recollection of joy when you were growing up?
So after I was six, yes, I still had a lot of smiles. I was a very, very joyful child, full of love. All I wanted to do was give love. All I wanted to receive was love. for me to smile was just really part of my personality. I will say after the abuse started at 12 from my stepfather, my smile changed. My smile became more not the joyful, innocent young person. It was more maybe a little forced and maybe a little sometimes like a seductive kind of thing because my view of love and what men wanted and what people I felt wanted from me was very skewed. And so I smiled because there was the camera, but you really do see a difference in my smile. Absolutely.
Mm. Yeah. So one of the things that's interesting are the people that you mentioned. One of the things that kind of grabbed me initially is I think the first boyfriend that your mother had was named Tim. So like in the first few paragraphs of the book, you're saying, and Tim was this, and I'm going, little, that's my name too. And then I got to tell you, a slight chuckle, and I'm not making light of the situation, but to see the name Richard Dick in writing and to know that he was
Dick, Dick.
the one, yeah. It's like not funny, but uh, odd. One of
I,
the things that I kind of picked up on a few themes in reading through the book,
yeah.
and you talk about it some, and I just want to ask about it.
Mm,
That is that there are situations where people are victimized.
mhm,
And there's no doubt that when an adult male does something sexual with a 12-year-old, that there is an inappropriate situation there. But there's also situations where we start owning the term victim. And I think you use the word victimhood. And this is a difficult question for someone who hasn't experienced it. So I hope it's appropriate. But in looking back, is there anything that you would advise? Let me tell you one of the reasons for this question too. I've got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old granddaughter. I know they're going out in the world, and I guess I'm just wondering if you could have told your 12-year-old self or even your 6-year-old self something, what would you have said that might have helped the situation? And if that's like a Tim, you don't understand type question, you could tell me that. But eh, yeah,
I guess at that time when I was 12 years old and my mother married Richard, I thought he was my knight in shining armor, that I was finally going to have a dad, that I was going to have this beautiful life, right? With my mother finally. And no matter what my mother ever did to me in my life, I loved her with every essence of myself. And I always wanted her to love me and be the mom I always wanted. And so I thought Richard was going to be that answer for us. So when that didn't happen, I continued to seek that. So I guess that I would tell my 12-year-old self that as difficult as this is, and for all the pain you're going through, that you will one day understand why you had to go through this, and that you will find your knight in shining armor and you will be loved. You will find that love in your life that you've always been seeking.
and it seems that around that time you began seeking it in a lot of places that now you know they were unhealthy. Tell us a little bit about some, because some I believe, and you say this, it was you obviously attractive, and I'm guessing you were also attractive then, and you use that, but then also alcohol was introduced. Talk about a little bit of both of that and what that did when that identity was impacted. And then you started looking to bring peace in through some various avenues.
The reality is that you become like a shell of yourself. And like for me, it became this idea that, well, all I have to offer is what I have on the outside. So I need to make that perfect all of the time. And I need to attract men. I need to have a man in my life for me to have some sort of validation. And if I look a certain way and a man or a teenager, whatever, shows me attention, and then also am sexual with them, that I will be loved. It becomes very skewed, as I said. Like, you want that fulfilling love, but you don't really know what it looks like, what it feels like. You have these protected barriers around you. But the interesting thing is that in that time, your exterior and how you look on the outside and what you do with your body becomes your superpower. So I used that for many years as that's my power, and I will control you by getting what I want. Does that make sense?
And it works to a certain extent, correct?
Mm-hmm. But you're empty. And then, when I was young, those younger years, I would drink to actually do those things that were uncomfortable for me with a boy, because it's not like I really wanted to. I lost my virginity at 15, and I remember thinking that I had to do that for that boy to like me more. And it just became so crazy. Like, I would be with someone that's the unhealthy relationships that I had throughout my life, like, it became a cycle. So I would hook you, bring you in, we would form a relationship. It was very dysfunctional. I would try to change you, and then I would become unhappy and unfulfilled. And then I would go outside of the relationship and find somebody else so that you couldn't hurt me. I was going to hurt you first, and then I would move on to another relationship. So it was just never, it really was never peace. It was like fun and drinking, and then it was volatile and fighting. And then it was like going outside of the relationship and finding someone else and starting all over. It was exhausting, to be
And
honest.
the alcohol numbed you.
No,
It empowered you and numbed you almost at the same time
100%.
to
100%.
perpetuate. My wife's story is that perfection was also part of what she was achieving. She
Yeah.
thought it would keep her parents together,
Yeah.
generate love from her mother, and possibly acceptance from her father who had abandoned her, left them. So what she did, she went a little bit different way, and she hated men, is what she said.
There's that too.
Which I will tell you, Marcy, made it pretty darn difficult when we bumped into each other and I was fairly smitten. And
Yeah.
one of the first things out of her mouth was, I hate men. I am just so egotistical and arrogant enough to say, oh, well, this could be a bit of a challenge.
I tell you,
But
it's always driven by a challenge. Believe me.
yeah. All right. So what it led to was this, if I did the math right, 20, 30 years of alcohol abuse.
Yes.
And one of the things you said, I do want to kind of layer this in. I think you brought this in towards the tail end of the book. You said that your view of yourself had been attractive, or that you had looks, but that you didn't feel as if you were intelligent or smart.
Yes.
Were either one of those lies?
Well, what's interesting is if you look back at my life and in work and all, I was always succeeding. I was always moving and moving up, and people would seek me out and put me in higher positions. So I guess I was doing something right. I'm a very driven person, but as you said, that alcohol would numb me, and it didn't allow me to work at my full capacity. And so a lot of times when I would drink, I think more of that feeling stupid was I couldn't think very clearly. I would say things that were very embarrassing. So I was constantly in this cycle of shame about how I was feeling. And so really it was not trusting myself, not believing in myself. And the only way that I felt comfortable is if I was having a glass of wine. And
Mm.
so I think that I know now, I mean, I know I'm not stupid and I know that I can do whatever I put my mind to. But at that time, I was so broken inside. And so the only thing I knew how to do was be loving to my children. My children were everything to me, and try to keep the facade up of
Mm.
everything looking perfect, but all the while feeling that I was nothing but a failure.
Right. What were
Mhm.
the ages of your children when I think it was October of 2015. We'll talk about that in just a little while. But
Yeah.
what were their ages when you had your moment? That
Well,
I'm
when I
curious.
was thinking, they were 9 and 11.
Those are some pretty impressionable ages. Have you had any discussions with them about what it was like before and then what it's been like after? And what do you think the impact has been on them that they've kind of lived through this journey?
Well, honestly, Tim, I was on that slippery slope of drinking, but it wasn't like I wasn't drinking to a blackout every night. I wasn't, it was just, and there's a lot of women out there, a lot of men out there. I mean, you're at home and you're having 3, 4 drinks in a night, right? And that becomes the norm. And I couldn't go to a restaurant if they didn't serve alcohol. And so it, in my drinking elevated, when I got in front of the camera, I started using it as liquid courage. The worst part of that time was, making negative, difficult, disastrous decisions and things that I was doing. And then also the yelling and fighting that my husband and I were going through. That was the most impactful, traumatic thing for my son. My daughter doesn't remember anything really, but my son, now that I know my son as an adult, he's an extremely intelligent person. So he was taking in even more than I even understood. And so he has had to deal with that. I thought at that time it was about working on myself and working on the relationship with my husband. But the reality was that my son was affected by what was going on. And we gave them a lot of really wonderful years, but now I'm very open with my book and my public speaking. And so my son and I have had those conversations. My daughter and I have had those conversations. And what has helped me be an even better parent when it comes to drinking now is that I educate my daughter. She's exploring the drinking at 19 years old, and I'm able to share with her, how it affects you, the decisions, the negative decisions that you can make, how people will take advantage of you. And there's a lot of parents out there that just say, no, you can't drink, or they kind of perpetuate that drinking for them. They're like feeding them the alcohol and they think it's fun to party with their kids. And, so it's just allowed me to be more of a teacher in that area. But I will say it also gives me a lot of fear because it is very rampant in my family, addiction. So it's scary to watch that because I'm not sure what the outcome's going to be and I can't control that. Right. So But I will tell you that we are working on the things that are needed to be worked on. For my son, he has his own mental health struggles. He has ADHD. He's twice exceptional. He's gone through some depression, and some of that is trauma based. And so he's working on that right now. We're working on that as a family.
I actually have come to believe that it's very difficult for anyone to go through life without something that's
Mhm.
going to cause some issues. Our story is that we were living in a resort community, golf courses, blah, 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 all leading up to '08, and then 5 years later, and our kids were they were probably pushing the ages that yours were when you became sober, and
Yeah.
then we went through financial collapse that was just like, me waking up every morning and just saying, "Okay, just keep punching me in the gut, punch me in the gut," because my identity was sort of tied up in, I'm good at business, I'm good at making money, I'm good at bringing things in, and we're realizing now our children are in their 30s that, there was pretty big impact with trauma because they bring up trauma and, sometimes people of my generation go, "Trauma? What are you talking about?"
I know
Come
it's
on.
very different.
But what it was, I mean, we were in a 6,000 square foot home, and then my wife and I were in a Honda van and told the kids there's no home to come home to. So
Wow.
a lot of that's been restored. But let's talk about kind of the road to recovery, because I think it's a learning, and I want to layer this in. Your story is alcohol, but addictions, and I know there's varying degrees of the harm that addictions can have, but we're in a society where there's drugs. My addiction was more
Mhm. Yeah.
as a business person. There was never enough. And I had a conversation on the podcast with someone who had served time in prison. And I said, "How at 32 were you continuing doing the things you were doing?" He goes, "I was addicted to more." I said, "That's my addiction too." It's
Yeah.
a little bit it's a little bit more acceptable in our culture and society because sometimes it's
Yeah.
applauded,
Yeah.
but talk about what you've learned about addiction in general, and then we're gonna talk about some things as we wrap up here with projects you've got in the book and things like that, but just what have you learned about addiction in general over the last 10 years?
Well, addiction generally is a coping or masking of a deeper issue, something that you are, trying to fill within yourself and because something else is lacking. The other thing about addiction, whether it's food or workaholic or working out too much or being on the computer or social media or drinking or drugs, it literally all stems from the same thing. And that is the dopamine hit that we get within our brain. And that's the feel good chemical within our brains, right? So the more we do it, we feel good the first time, we feel good the second time, we feel good the thousandth time, but then it doesn't feel good anymore. It becomes too much. Our brains literally have to rewire the way that we are uh, trans, transferring that dopamine within our brains. And so that really is at the core. It makes us feel good. And so what do we want? We want to feel good. We want to be happy. And it's easier to be happy if you're doing these other things, because to be fulfilled is work. It's action. And there are multiple things that you need to do to rewire the way that you think, rewire the way that we were programmed from when we were raised, rewire the way that we talk to ourselves, the way we think of ourselves, how we energetically put ourselves out there towards the universe and the world. And there's just so many things that we need to do. And this is something I've done. So I know it works. But addiction at the end of the day is really just masking a bigger problem.
I've always wondered, and I actually was thinking through this as I was reading through your book, because part of your recovery process was going to AA.
Mm.
And I so appreciate in your book, you, in your words, walking through the 12-step process. I want to tell you right up front how I appreciated that because I knew piece parts of the 12-step process. I've never had anyone walk through it kind of in, we'll call it layman's terms,
Yeah,
not the big book or anything like that.
yeah,
And at its foundation, it is a surrender to that higher power, which I would word it as a minister and a follower of Jesus Christ as, and you've said it similarly, letting Jesus come into your life and admitting that there's something bigger than you.
yeah.
How important is I mean, because I think what we begin doing, I would put my business, expertise, air quotes for those that are not watching this on the video, as higher than my relationship with my Heavenly Father.
Oh, of
And it
course.
sounds to me like your alcohol and things like that, you elevated it. We call it idols, I guess, in church world, but they aren't. Doesn't it seem like most of us are going through this life looking at putting many things above that relationship with God?
Yeah, yeah. Listen, I was raised in church, but just life was so chaotic that it didn't it didn't stay with me. I always believed in God. I always loved God and Jesus. But when I got sober and there was a little church, most AA meetings are held at a church. There was a little church attached to the place that we had the meeting. And I would go into this little church and I just started slowly becoming more connected and grounded and quiet. And there was a lamb, a little picture of a lamb, literally like this big. And it had a gold lamb with a red felt back and it was framed. And I would just look at this lamb and I was just like, Jesus, save me. Jesus, come into my heart. And if you get, if I get through this, I will always follow you. I will always, you will be my shepherd. And it is, in church, we're always taught he's just waiting for you to ask. And when that happened, it really, and it wasn't just one time. I mean, it was over and over. And I started practicing every morning, praying to God. And there was a YouTube video. I mean, we're talking almost 10 years later. I still go to this YouTube video connecting to God. And it's not any specific religion or anything. It's about truly, because I think of God now, like we're raised to almost think of like this man with, silver hair and a silver beard in the sky. And he's bigger than all of us, right? But it's just this divine energy of love. And we're all connected by this love. And so now I just feel that. I envision that. And then I see myself in Jesus's arms. And
Mhm.
it's just my connection today is so, so very, very different. And it has saved me. And I do it every day because it is a practice to stay connected. So as you're saying, right, all these other things become more important and and God or our divine or universe, whatever, because it's down here. But we
Mhm.
work every day. We're not doing that practice every day. So that's why you have to make that practice every day. And then the work, you still can do the work, but it's almost more fulfilling and you're better at it when you have that connection and you make God, universe, the divine, the priority. And,
Right.
and so that has changed significantly for me. And that's why today it is the number one practice for me.
Do you think you're almost 10 years sober? Congratulations. Do you
Yes.
think that there is any way you could have had 1 year to 10 years sober without that spiritual foundation?
not at all.
You've been around a number of people with AA. Do you believe that that is the common thread?
When you work the program and you do the foundational steps, and that's one of the reasons I shared, because most people don't know, right? They're outside and they don't really know what it is. But those steps, no matter who you are, will benefit you in your life. It helped me get sober, but what it really helped me to do was heal. I had been through therapy. I had been through all the things, right? But when I started doing that work, it was completely different. I mean, AA is really based, it's a spiritual based
Right.
program.
Right.
So that's why I shared that.
One of the things that came to mind while I was reading through your book, it's a little bit of we just talk spiritual now I believe we're spirit, soul, and body. That's what we're made up of.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I thought of while reading through this was, what is the physical implications of someone who's drinking? You use the term almost daily. So I'm assuming you're drinking almost daily for that length of time. I did the math. I don't know if it was 30 years or 20 something years or something like that. Can you, do you notice anything physically? I believe that you could also be healed. I believe that God can heal that and restore all that. But do you notice anything that you tell yourself that's probably a repercussion from somewhat abusing myself physically for a period of time? Does that make sense?
Right. For me, no, I don't have any repercussions at this time from that.
Right.
Uh, at the time, I was very puffy and I couldn't sleep. I was also going through perimenopause, which is another huge factor I've realized post my addiction, and that in my 40s, how difficult that time was for me. I also had a lot of burning in my stomach. I'm sure that I was eating away the lining of my stomach, probably. So there were a lot of issues there, but I would say that I'm very healthy today.
One of the things I'm curious about is, I know you've been through AA, I know you've done through all that, but are there other barriers that one puts up? I mean, let's look at men that are addicted to porn. One of the things that they will do is stay offline. And and I think in your book you mentioned one point, there was you were alone in the house and you had a brief fleeting thought of having a
Mhm.
drink. And so I was actually curious, was there still alcohol in the house? What do you do when you go out with other people that may be drinking? We actually we have a where we're at here in this resort. We're having a happy hour tonight. It's not totally dedicated to drinking, but there'll be probably a little bit of wine and something like that. Do you go to those things? What would that look like for you now?
Yeah, today, sometimes I feel like I'm a bit of an anomaly because I don't go to the 12-step program anymore. And I have no problem with having alcohol around me at all. There's alcohol in the house. I go to functions all the time. It does not bother me at all. I would never, never, I mean, you can't say I won't ever, but can't predict the future. But what I have, I would never, ever want to give up for any amount of alcohol. But in the beginning, when you're starting, just like anything, when you're changing a bad habit or an addiction to something, there are multiple things that you have to change. There's many things that you learn within the meetings that help you. The first thing is, and this is with anything, you need to change the people, places, and things, the things that trigger you to drink. And yes, you need to take it all out of your house. And you can't go to the same restaurants. You can't necessarily hang around the same people, because if you're drinking, you're probably hanging around people that are drinking like you or more, or, so you don't feel bad about yourself. You do have to change. And for instance, that incident that you're talking about that I shared in my book, my husband traveled a lot. And if you're alone, you can do anything, but who knows? You're full of guilt over that. And I didn't want to live with that anymore. And so one of the things that I had learned was move a muscle, change a thought. You can only think about one thing at one time. So I was laying on the couch, I was watching a movie, and I thought about, oh, if I had some wine right now, no one would know. But I got up and I actually went and got the big book and I did something else, so, and that's with anything, so if you're at a party, make sure you drive your own car so you can leave, make yourself useful, always make yourself useful. That's a big thing. Don't put yourself in a situation if you think that you're going to fail. Make sure you've eaten, make sure you drink enough water. So there's just all these things. I mean, I could go down a million lists. I've got a whole toolbox I've actually put together. I have so many freebies that I have, but that's a big one for me. But there's many, many tools that you must implement in your life to help you to be successful.
My favorite, let me just go ahead and say this, were
Mhm.
naps. You promoted naps. And, people that are achievement oriented,
Mhm.
typically we think naps are for losers or sissies or whatever word. And you know what? I actually believe we're a fatigued society. And when we're fatigued, we make poor choices. And I think being rested is very important now. Now I'm in my 60s, so I've got different mindset about that. I didn't
Yeah.
used to think that way. I used to be hustle, hustle, hustle. And sounds like
Yeah.
you were in industries that were similar. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So one of the things that we hear in our current culture is the need to be authentic and vulnerable and
Yeah.
share and all of these things.
Yeah.
And I don't think you're of my generation, you're a generation behind me, but it's one thing to go through what you went through, Marcy.
Mhm.
It's another thing to all of a sudden say, I'm gonna share it with the world.
Yeah.
What's up with that? I mean, here I am, I'm on a podcast and I've shared my story. And I
Yeah.
actually have in some of my quiet times with the Lord, I'll say, Lord, is this something I just need to keep to myself?
Yeah.
Or do I need to talk about it with Marcy so that the world can hear it on YouTube? And tell me a little bit about the process of going from deal with it on my own, keep it quiet within the family, etc., or wake up with Marcy, write a
Yeah.
book, talk
Yeah.
about that.
Well, first of all, I'll say if you stay isolated, quiet, and keep it in your family, you're going to stay sick. Sharing your story is so, so important for your healing. Doesn't need to be with the world, but it is so important to talk about things, get perspectives from other people. They allow you to get advice and people out there that can help you, and you don't feel alone and you don't feel stuck and you don't feel like you're the only one going through it. So I think that that's really, really important. It wasn't like I initially just started sharing with everyone. I started healing and there were some things that I was going through. And my book has to clarity seeing the signs and breaking the cycle. So seeing the signs, I started seeing signs from the other side. I started being guided as to what it is that I was meant to do. And so sharing my story, writing a book, starting a TV show, I mean, I can't even fathom that I've done all of these things, but I was so guided to do them. And when I listened and started pursuing those things, there were people that were brought into my life that helped me to move forward to make it possible. And I just listened to my inner intuition. We must listen to our intuition. And I just knew that it was the right thing to do to help other people to not feel by themselves, not feel alone. And it was hard in the beginning. Listen, I used to feel like, God, I'm going to be so judged in my community, but I just I've always asked God when I started this that I'm your conduit. Just please speak through me and to help me make a difference.
I think there's so much power in that. my story is similar. When we went through all that we went through and my identity was wrapped up in I'm a successful business person. And then I started feeling this nudge to do a podcast and I
Mhm.
wanted to interview all these people and stuff like that. The Lord literally told me, no, you have to tell your story first. And the first episode is titled Homeless and Bankrupt, our number one episode. So we're close to 300 now.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I have a pretty firmness about confidence and stuff like that, but you could hear my voice quivering
Mm.
to that, where I'm like going, I don't want to share this.
Yeah.
I don't. And then so many people right away said, thank you for sharing that because we went through similar things. We did this and all of that. How do you, part of what we've done here, Marcy, with this podcast is we've tried to kind of bust up paradigms about what success is.
Mhm.
How are you defining success, say pre 2015? And how are you defining success right now?
Well, success was I getting validation from other people all the time. I was a victim of wanting more also. It was just no matter what I did, it never was enough. And so I was always striving for more. And I always needed someone to tell me how good I was doing. Right. Today, listen, I still can be a little insecure at times, right? We're all human. But what really defines success for me today is at the core, if I am happy, if it feels good, and it benefits me and my family. Like if it's right, if it's right. If it is at the expense of my family, my happiness, then it is not success.
Yeah. Kind of goes back to
Mm.
that childlike joy that we
Yeah.
talked about earlier that I saw in my wife. And you said that you had it. It's like, it's hard to know it, but you know it.
Mhm.
You know it. We've used the word peace. Also, there's just this peace that happens. And I could kind of tell, like I said, I had to do a little bit of research on you here over the last few days. And I'm like going, this doesn't seem like someone that spent 30 years drinking almost every day, that did all that you talked about doing. That was one of the fascinating things about the book to me was how quickly it read. And it wasn't like you were matter of factly going through those things, but you sort of were. You were just sort of like just putting it out there and it just read very quickly. And I actually believe it's for anyone who's probably going through some type of struggle, I think it would be a blessing to them. Marcy, for people that want more of you, tell us now where they could find. It's on my Kindle here, the
Uh-huh.
book, but tell us where they can find you. You've got a show, I think, that's out there. I found it on YouTube this morning. I'm pointing to my TV for people wondering TV here in the RV. Tell us where people can find you. We'll put it down in the notes. And then I got one more question I want to ask you before we wrap up.
Well, everything is on wakeupwithmarcy.com. And I will tell you my new guided mission in life. I have retired the talk show. I haven't retired from doing a talk show, but I have retired the show on WLNY TV. I shot my last episode last week and I moved to Florida to be a snowbird until May. And I'm extremely happy. And what I'm doing now is I am launching my show. I'm continuing with the name Wake Up with Marcy because I've had the branding for 7 years. I'm just changing look. And it's going to be more geared as a podcast because you can reach people globally. You can deep dive into conversations where you can't do that on a TV show. You've got like 7, 8 minutes or 4 minutes. It's very, very tight. And so my dream has to always been to really fully connect with somebody and share their stories to create change. And you can't do that when you have a TV show necessarily. So I launching my podcast March 1st, Wake Up with Marcy, a deep dive into self-discovery. And I'm partnering with USA Today, the media conglomerate. Did I say the word right?
The big company, the media big company, we'll call it.
Big company. We'll keep it small. But I've had this opportunity to partner with them. So I'm going to have also some of my show that will be on USA Today. So I'm just very excited about that. And so hopefully your listeners will maybe find some joy and peace and change within that. So
That's
yeah.
exciting. Boy, this would have been a great conversation too, is you have probably seen such a change in the world of media
Oh,
and television and things like that. Love the pivot or the adjustment that you're making, because when I even saw it that you had like a local type show that was picked up and broadcast different places, I was thinking in my mind, I said, you know what? I haven't seen that in a while. I mean, I'm
yeah.
in the podcast world, so, people are doing this and they've got YouTube, and I believe that that is going to go extremely, extremely well for you. And we'll look forward to seeing and hearing some more information from that. And if we can help you with any part of it, just let me
Yeah.
know. Marcy, I had a final question, but I'm going to call an audible. I'm going to ask you to do something. I believe that there are people out there that might be going through some type of an addiction, and this conversation may have helped them maybe realize it. And, it could be alcohol, drug, it could be any number of things.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you to, I hate to limit 30 seconds or something, just look in the camera, speaking in the microphone, and encourage them, tell them something. I don't know what it would be. We'll kind of let the Lord maybe guide you here. But if someone is struggling with things like maybe you were in 2015, what would you want to tell that person?
I've been there. I've been where you are right now. And it is a very scary time. You feel very alone. You feel that there's no answer. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. But I will tell you that you're not alone. There's so much help and there's so much beauty through recovery. And you are meant to live an incredibly beautiful life, and that your past does not define you, and you are worthy. You are worthy of happiness, and that addiction does not have to keep you stuck. It is possible to move forward. I promise you that.
Hmm. Thank you for that, Marcy. I'm glad I did something different there. What an incredible conversation with Marci Hopkins. Make sure you get a copy of, I'm going to try to hold it up here, Chaos to Clarity. It's on my Kindle, so it probably doesn't look as good as the actual cover. And I want to remind people, check everything out down in the links below. Get ready, because like we mentioned earlier, our next few episodes are going to be epic, celebrating 300, super big and all. We've got two of our most popular guests from 5 years ago when we got started coming back. Silicon Valley veteran and original Netflix startup 6 member, Jim Cook, and business as mission evangelist, Mike Baer. They're going to be our guest. And there'll be one more guest that I will tell you, it's probably the biggest guest we've ever had on the show. I'm not going to tell you just yet, but they'll be sharing insights on the past 5 years and also predictions for the next 5. So make sure you subscribe. Don't miss these anniversary episodes. Go check out everything Marcy talked about. Look for her new podcast, Wake Up with Marcy. It's coming out, she said, March 1st, depending on when you're listening to this. Until next time, continue being all that you were created to be.